I'm Sara Siestreem. I'm a member of the Hannes Coos tribe from the south coast of Oregon. Thank you, ma'am, for bringing me here and having this exhibition of my work called Ballast. I'm an abstract painter, and my painting is a painting. I have a painting process. I enact 2 or 3 different activities in my painting process. I'm mining a gesture, so you'll see a lot of drawing elements in my work, as well as paint elements. The drawing elements are based on gesture. I'm mining the natural quality that exists in my body. It's based on an observation of nature. In nature, we see that cycles repeat themselves, as do all brilliant and beautiful ideas. If we look to how a tree works and then we look at our lungs, there's a similar design pattern. If you look in a gorge, you see reclining figures in the landscape. Those are things that have really informed my process. And then the cycles that repeat themselves. If we think about how our body works as we grow, we think about reproductive cycles, how a plant grows, how the moon and the ocean works, those kind of things are informing my process. So I've looked at that and I've created a theory that is based on that. And the theory goes that we contain that nature, and if I were to create a pattern of repetitious activity, potentially nature would emerge, some sort of life or energetic force would emerge. In my painting process, I have a really limited activity that I can interact with. I have these gestures that I draw, so it's an ovid sort of this, and then there's these circles that we'll see in all the paintings that I will describe in a moment, as well as this gesture of kind of a scribbling up and down and back and forth. That gesture is based on the idea that each line, like this tip of the drawing utensil, is the culmination of every baby I've picked up, every weed I've pulled, everything I've done with my body. All the muscle memory and all those kinds of events are contained in our bodies and come out in that last little point. And every single one of us has a really unique line that comes out of us, so that's the gesture. This circle that you'll see in all the work came about with a painting that you can look into the catalog to see called 24. It's a very small painting. So I did these little red circles over the whole surface of the painting, and then I noticed that it had some sort of energetic quality. So I looked to that and I waited with it, and then I just decided that could be part of my vernacular in paint. And then the color field painting is something based on how gravity works and how particles and liquid will organize themselves naturally with as little interference as I can pull back from doing. So I'm going back and forth between these activities. I go into the studio, I take the paper and I put it up on the wall, and then I start working my process. I'm just going back and forth between these activities. I don't have a plan. It's straight improvisation. It's also kind of informed by how jazz works. You have a really limited structure, and in that structure you're going back and forth and seeing what kinds of new ideas and lyrics that you can create throughout that system. So that's a little bit of how the paintings come about, or what my activity is in the studio. The other reduction is color. You'll notice that in this work the color is a really prevalent voice. So in my color theory I have a couple different things I'm considering. So I'm thinking about the audience more than anything. I'm thinking about the viewer. And so I'm thinking about our psychological reactions to color, which are physical sensations that we read as emotion. So if you put red next to green, there's a vacillation that happens in our eye, and it creates a sensation that we identify with. So I'm thinking about how colors relate to each other and how humans interact with those colors. That's one part of it. The other, the kind of nature part of it, the instinctual relationship that we have to color. That they feel good or they express things. The other part that I'm considering is our historical and symbolic relationships to color. When we see red, white, and black together, we think about punk rock or alchemy or maybe socialism or possibly propaganda. So when I'm doing something that's really political, I'm maybe going to be using those kinds of combinations to speak to you about our historical kind of tempers that come along with those things. When I'm using red, white, black, and yellow, I'm thinking about the Lakota medicine wheel and the color theory that's related to those things. And on and on and on and on. All colors, we have different kinds of historical and social relationships too. So those things are at play absolutely in my work and in my theoretical kind of constraints that I've created in order to develop this language. So that's the nuts and bolts of how I get there and what my language is about. And then these other things emerge. When I'm creating this noise on the surface, I'm looking for something to speak to you about our life. So I'm thinking about the land, I'm thinking about animals, I'm thinking about experience and histories and all of those kinds of things, my own as well as our collective. And then as I'm working, language will emerge in my mind and I will write that stuff on the wall. And so I'll have kind of a record, and then I'll refer to that at the end when I'm naming the babies. I go into the studio with the goal to have that time out of mind that Bob Dylan and Michael Jordan and everybody talks about, where 3 hours have gone by and you've totally forgotten what's going on. But this amazing thing is that the residue of your experience being the painting. And this circle that I'm doing is a kind of a direct route to get to that state. It's very meditative, and it does this really kind of quick trip to get to that. So that's a helpful tool to get to my place there. Then the work eventually kind of contains some sort of content that hopefully will be a speaking point for us, and something that can be a record of our collective experience from my point of view, which is informed by my cultural heritage, my gender, the time and place I was born in America, all of those kinds of things. So it's a way for me to inform history from a point of view that's not the mainstream. This painting right here is called For Children in Cold Climates, and I did it the week that Trayvon Martin was killed. He was 17 and he was cutting through a neighborhood to get home. He had a bottle of Snapple in his pocket and some Skittles. And there was a security guard who was very racist, and he said, he shot him. And he said that he had a hood on his head, and so he knew he was a gangster. And he said, if you're going to live like a thug, you'll die like one. In public, he said this. And a year later, very recently, he was found innocent and set free. And so that's the end story on that. The beginning of it, I was in my studio, and I was just devastated by this, as I'm sure most of America was. How are we still at a time when a child can't walk through somewhere at peace to go home? You know, to me, this is like, we're in major trouble if this is still going on. And then it's only compounded, and the sorrow is only extended when we also, in our judicial system, decide that it's okay. Like that message is unexcusable to me and unforgivable. And so I made this painting the week that he was killed, and in some sort of reference to it. And again, I wasn't like, I'm going to make a painting for Trayvon. I just was devastated, and I was working in my way that's helpful to me. And I don't usually do human figurative work, but I was thinking about buttons. And so I had these drawings of buttons going and these circles going. I mean, buttons play in some of our regalia. And so I was thinking about that. But I had these circles here. There was no red on it at all. And then this, and I saw this figure development. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a row of avenging minion. I saw it, and so I was like, okay, well, I'll give them hoods. And so here's a row of people in the sky watching down. And I've terminated their bodies with this end of my ovid, which is a fishtail. So my tribe is a salmon tribe. We're salmon people. We're a coastal tribe. And so salmon is a critical part of our culture. And so I've identified these as Kus, avenging minion. And this is, in my view, a kind of apocalyptic sky. Here's an eagle dropping fire, and here's the land. And so I created this piece eventually as a statement to say that we're watching and we don't approve of this. And the red, white, and black goes into that. So that piece is called For Children in Cold Climates. The poetry is that when you're cold, you put your hood up, not as a gang activity. So that's what that piece is about. To get to the other side of life, the tranquil and the sublime, this painting is called Waterline. My early childhood was on the Umpqua River Valley, which is a place close to God. If you've ever been there, it's extremely beautiful. And I grew up on the river and deep in the water and swimming with fish, schools of them, and diving for fish vertebrae and playing my heart out. And but now I live in a city which also has incredible stimulations and wonderful things to enrich my life. But there's a loneliness for that deep natural environment. And a lot of my painting activity is an effort to transport myself to this place that's contained in me through my life experience. And also hoping to share that with the viewer, because I think we all as human animals have an innate attachment and reaction to a deep natural privacy. And I know that I felt this maybe the first time I saw Van Gogh in person. There's an emotion, I call it a visceral reaction. You have a physical reaction to art sometimes that's really powerful, I think, which is why we as humans culturally have been taking care of it for so long. And it comes out of all of us, and we really respond to that energetic kind of quantity that can be contained in a painting. So my goal, end game, is to create work that speaks to that to us as human animals. And so this is a painting which is much more where I want to be than this for children piece. It's the color theory stuff. It's how red and green work, which is a really deep pleasure kind of thing. You can turn it up to where it's impossible to see if you switch your contrast up, but this is kind of the realm of deep visual pleasure. And this is just a kind of a home piece. It's really simple. It's what I would call a 3-stroke painting, even though if you look closely, there's clearly way more than 3 strokes. But there's elementally kind of 3 things going. There's this green field back here, there's this red field here, and this one line here that gives us the kind of where the horizon and or where like the water and the land meet. And so I think it's really graceful that these two are with each other to help balance, which is a big thought in my work, is that it's really important that we think about the grief, but it's also important that we can survive and live somewhere that is possible and peaceful and working towards a transcendent experience as opposed to one that's just completely broken. So, oil paint takes 9 months to bone dry, so I can't wait for that. My painting is a really fast thing. Each painting, I try to limit myself to like 2 days, which are like 8-hour days. And so I'll put it up, I'll work on it for 1 day, I'll let myself rest in the evening, and then I'll come back the next day and work on it. And then whether I know where it is or not, I have to take it down and put it to the side, because your perspective is kind of truncated because you're so involved in making this thing come off. And so with oil paint, because of how I was using it, you can kind of go pretty quick. I'm using both acrylic and oil paint in the manner of watercolor. So I'm not using extra mediums, I'm just using water in the paint itself, which makes a pretty thin layer. And so I'm able to go right on top of it if I need to. And if there's a little pickup underneath, it's okay. You know, it's part of being honest to how the materials are, that they're this viscous kind of live thing. I was painting with oil paint. I had a paint sponsorship, so I had unlimited access, and I was making all of these large paintings. Ended up getting really sick. I ended up having really severe migraines, the last one lasting 7 days. And so if you can't tolerate light, you can't make paintings. So I switched over to acrylic. So this show has both. It's the end of the oil paintings, and then the beginning of the acrylic. The painting over there, Airstream, the last spaceship, it's a goofy painting, and it was not where I intended to end my life with oil, but it just so happened that was the last piece I did. I was still really sick, and I was like, oh, yeah. And it's really goofy. I thought it was kind of looked like a spaceship or one of those incredible old beautiful trailers. Yeah. And if you look in the black field, it looks kind of like there's some fish. Maybe the aliens brought us the fish originally or something. Just a little fantasy. Yeah, so now I'm in acrylic. It took about 2 months to get the acrylic to do what the oil would do, or to look like it. You know, it doesn't feel that the same to me to make it. But I kept an oil painting next to my painting wall, and so until I could get the acrylic to look like that, I couldn't I couldn't relax. So it was a furious couple months. Actually, it's been a maddening year because oil paint is such a luscious kind of sensual material, and it feels so good, and it does really spectacular things. And acrylic is kind of dead, and it takes a lot more finesse and a lot more kind of begging to get it to do something that is as luminous and as the fat of an oil will do. Fat versus plastic is a clear thing, which we know from food and we know in all those places. But you know, you can get it to do the thing. It just takes a lot of work. So it's getting there. Everybody who raised me, everybody in my family does art. My dad and stepmom are both architects. And so I grew up at the U of O Architecture School under their drafting desks playing with all that stuff. We didn't have like all kinds of crazy plastic toys. We had like drafting tools, right? So pencils, yeah. And then my mother was a stained glass artist for 30 years and also grew up in her studio. So everybody in my family, my grandfather was a welder and woodworker, and I mean, it was just everybody did stuff. So it was part of growing up. And I knew from a very early time, early identity stuff, that that's what I wanted. I didn't start school till I was 24 and got really kind of, I was not interested in being part of the canon, but I changed my mind. And school was magnificent. And now I teach. I teach at Portland State and Northwest Indian College and all that kind of stuff. I think it's pretty much the best place to be for jobs, you know, for me. Yeah, so forever, since I got here. Coming up development, I've painted on everything, doors, everything. This piece is an older one, and it's on panel, and it's the only piece in the show. Everything else is on paper. Before I went to graduate school, I was looking at the blue chip galleries in Portland and showing them my work, and they loved it. They were like, oh my goodness, this is really exciting. However, we would need to re-educate our entire clientele to be able to sell this to them because it was so raw. My work had all kinds of found objects in it, and it was on, like I said, doors and whatever, which was part of my entire ethic, or is part of my entire ethic. But I love a challenge, and I'm absolutely ambitious, and so concepts of refinement are completely welcome. When I got to Pratt Art Institute, which is where I went to graduate school in New York, I was studying with a printmaker who makes the Chuck Close prints, and Tom Little at Brand X, and so I was doing a lot of silkscreen. Now I'm a mess maker, not a clean maker. A clean maker is a printmaker, a mess maker is a painter. And so needless to say, I had a lot of silkscreen that didn't come off. And silkscreen from him was done on BFK Reeves, which is the paper that I use. This paper is created to make oil prints on. And so it's impervious to the rot that we typically get if we use oil on paper. So this paper is really special. It's cotton, it's handmade, it's fantastic, and it can handle oil paint. So I had all these broken silkscreen prints, and so I started painting into them, and it's like, oh, well, this is perfect because it's relatively instant. You buy the paper, you can start working on it, you know. I loved the way it took graphite and paint. It was just really seductive to me on every level. And then it's an element that's repeatable. And so I work on this paper. My gallery, Ogden, designed the framing mechanism for the smaller ones. So this is a design that is specific for my work. Other people use similar things, but this is specific to what I do. We don't use glass, so you don't have yourself reflected in the painting, so you can see the whole picture plane. And I really also am interested in intimacy, of feeling that you're not supposed to, but that you can touch it, you know, that you physically can be in the painting. I think that's really critical for the experience. And it also is then safer to transport, not as heavy. Glass is kind of dangerous, all that stuff. For the big pieces, you know, I work in all scales. So for the big pieces, there's a variety of ways of framing them, but it's very standard these days to use this wide open raw thing and to use the magnets. That is, you'll see that everywhere in museums around the world, and it's, I'm really in love with it. I like that kind of incredible closeness that you can have with it. If you were to collect this work, potentially you would invest in some kind of framing if you wanted glass or whatever, but then that would be a conversation we would have down the road. there's a lot of different solutions to how to deal with that. This piece is called Ballast. I'm really interested in wordplay, double meanings that are contained in the same word. This is a handout in solidarity to the African American population from the Native culture. I'm thinking about the historical relationship between our groups. A ballast in a ship is the thing that keeps it balanced. It's in the base, and the slave ships came here, and the ballasts were made with trade beads, and so there's this kind of old school relationship between all of us. So this country's we became a world power as America because of the exponential growth possible when you don't have to pay for labor or resources. Okay, so that's how we became such a big deal overnight, we as America. And in American history that we're taught in the public school system, or when I was coming up, I was born in '76, so I went through that in the 80s and 90s. When I was going through school, we were taught that trade beads were this wonderful thing that Native American people loved. Native people don't value money, and that we were glad to trade all of the mountains and fish and land for these trade beads, and which is not really true. While we did take the beads and we did use them in lots of different beautiful regalia and things, it didn't quite go the way that we're being taught in the school system. And so I'm kind of galled whenever I'm in those historical museums. And they're like, oh, and the Indians love the beads and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, not really. So I'm thinking about that kind of stuff. And when you'll see in the work lots of these circles and things, a lot of times I'm thinking about the beads and the complications that come with different kinds of revisionist history. And so I'm thinking about those relationships. And the other part I'm thinking about is the other side of ballast, the other side of keeping in balance and keeping afloat and moving through space and moving through time in a way that's graceful and peaceful and that you can survive, right? So I'm thinking about all the different parts of these kind of beautiful metaphors. So this painting actually is a lot of different things. One, it's huge, right? So what a thrill that we could have it in public, because I've never been able to show it before because it's so big. But how it came about is I've noticed on my painting wall, under all my paintings, there's this incredible rain that happens, this drip, which I'm always so attracted to, but I'm like, how do I get a hold of that? I mean, I've been able to get it into some of the paintings, but so much is lost. And so in order to try to somehow hold on to that, I lined my painting wall with these two big pieces of paper. And so a lot of paintings were made right on top of it. And so this is the residue or the aftermath of all of those other paintings. So it contains all of their time. And then I had this huge thing, and I was with it, and I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And I started to look at it, and I was like, okay, I can put these, to me, are 3 rows of beads. So I put them on there, and then this guy up here with these circles that I've spoken to. So these circles, you know, for me, they're a lot of different things, and hopefully for you guys too. I think about tallies, of course, beads. I think about ins and outs on our bodies, eye holes, ear holes, noses, mouths, everything like that. All over the place in the world, we see these circles. They also play in all kinds of historical art from humans. The caves of Lascaux, which is the first mark of man, it's in France. You see these in the cave paintings. You see it in Aboriginal art. You see it in Northwest Coast. You see it in all different kinds of human stuff. You see it in Africa. There's deep meditation kind of concepts connected to it out of transcendental kind of thought. So it's a universal human thing, which I think is why I started to like really gravitate towards it when I saw it coming out. It started as a way to get paint across. So I had the tube of paint and I was doing the circles just to get paint up, and then I was going to start moving it on this piece 24. And then I was like, whoa, that's talking to me from across the room. I'm going to hang on to that. And that's when I incorporated it into my painting process because of all the possible implications. And the rhythm is really helpful and peaceful. And it also is a compositional device. It ends up being kind of a design element that can help me either quiet something down or resolve an area that otherwise is too murky. So it does a lot of great things for me. Using white here was just a way to have it be kind of quiet because this is so active. So again, red and green do something kind of wonderful together. This green was also a way to bring down some of the incredible activity that was going on, so it would have some kind of control. Yeah, so that's how this piece came about. And it contains all the different elements. It's got my graphite, it's got my paint, and a lot of the white of the paper, which I think is also pretty beautiful. So that's the title piece, Ballast. Because I would like to end on something different than the heavy. So I'm a bird painter from way back, way before it became a social phenomenon to put it on every t-shirt and everything else, which kind of bugs me because I think that birds are pretty special. I look to them as a metaphor for what's innate and graceful and perfect in us. If you watch birds in flight as a group, they do these incredible symphonic movements together, and it's breathtaking. They're like instruments. They sing for joy in kind of more orchestrated ways than we can ever imagine. They fly, they have flight. I mean, geez, all these things they can do is really out of this world. And I think that as humans, as animals, we also have a certain kind of quality of incredible grace when we're not dealing with all of our games and rules and things, you know? And so when I use birds, I'm speaking about birds, but I'm also speaking about what's good and pure in us. You know, what's lyric and poetical and the way that we move and talk and feel and be with each other. And so this painting is light and easy and sweet, and it's about, you know, in our feet have these great kind of, I love ankles. I think the vulnerability of our feet is really something quite tender, and it's such a critical part of how we do everything, right? And we take them really for granted because it's so far away from us when we live up here. So these guys here, this could be, you know, these are the ankles or bird bodies. And it's just a sweet row of these guys. And this guy has got a little color pencil in it with this red here. So those are old drafting tools I stole from my dad. Yeah, so that's what this guy is about. It's to bring us into conversation with ourselves. Thanks for asking about that one. It's just such a thrill, you know. I mean, like I said, all my life I've been working with this stuff, and what a shocking, thrilling experience to get to share it with people, and to get such a beautiful place and such an elevated platform to speak from. You know, I think that art is the one place where we can, everybody gets a say. You know, and that these institutions today are opening the door to women and minorities, and they're allowing us to make a statement in history from that point of view is really optimistic. And I'm really just so grateful for the work of the people who are in the generations before me, who didn't give up and continued to plug away under all kinds of oppression, so that when I was born into this world with all of the different wonderful and crazy, amazing different things that I am, the sky was the limit, you know, if I kept working, if I keep working, if I keep working, if I keep working. You know, I think that says a lot. And so in order to honor and do my part to that work, it's critical for me to be doing these things, you know, and so that the dream is that so the Trayvon Martins of the world get to do their part when they're in their 50s, you know, and so that we get to live in a collective culture 7 generations from now that is better and is in the bird land of where we could be.